Hi, and welcome to Open Media Generation Presents, an award-winning youth show produced and crewed entirely by youth, for youth, and made for social issues affecting young people today. I'm your host, Layla Parker, and on the show, we'll be talking about the local issue of Rocky Flats, and also the issue in general about nuclear waste and the nuclear topic in general. So we're going to talk about what is this, and what occurred at Rocky Flats, and how people are affected by these issues, and how people feel about it, especially the general public, and what is going on at Rocky Flats right now, since there's a huge, big thing occurring. But before we actually talk about these things, and go into some interviews, we need to talk about some of the history of Rocky Flats. So, Rocky Flats was a nuclear weapons production facility that produced nuclear triggers for the U.S.'s nuclear arsenal back in those times. It was the subject of controversy. It was raided by the FBI and EPA for mismanagement in 1989. So they claimed it was cleaned up right now, but currently there are multiple developments on the property, including housing, along with a wildlife refuge. But there are still major concerns of safety by local activists and scientists. So how much of this information is actually publicly known? Well, we decided to interview people on the streets and at an activist rally to discover how much people actually knew about this issue. Here's the video.
It is efficient, powerful, cost-effective, and dangerous.
I don't know anything about nuclear energy in Colorado, but feel like it's pretty cool elsewhere.
Nuclear energy can be used, to power lights and, to power homes and businesses, vehicles.
I don't believe there's any nuclear power plants in Colorado. I'm familiar with aspects of nuclear technology, like fission reactors or fusion reactors.
Very little. I've heard of the Rocky Flats area. I've heard of cases of cancer and the dust blowing around, and there being increased rates of cancer in neighborhoods where people live near nuclear waste.
If there isn't cleanup of a contamination site, then it's basically an environmental problem on the extreme.
I know that it was a super fun site that the government paid a lot of money to clean up, because after the company that ran it left town, they left a big mess for taxpayers to take care of.
So I know that there's great concern over nuclear waste in Rocky Flats, and the last thing I read about it was there's a very large real estate development that people are trying to have established either on or near that area.
Technically, Rocky Flats was cleaned up. The government says it's safe now, and they put a wildlife refugee with a hike and bike trails on top of it, and are building new housing development next to it.
Maybe for a quick pass through, but I'd be a little wary, and I probably wouldn't want to spend a ton of time there.
I can't say that I would.
Most likely not.
Would you live there?
No, I don't believe so.
Sure, why not?
Would you live there?
No.
Biking, yes. But would I live there? Probably not.
I think that there should be future testing. I don't believe that they should just tell us it's safe and then we go on. That if they're going to believe that it's safe, that there should be regular testing so that we're making sure that future generations aren't injured or harmed by what happened.
I think private companies should have to set aside part of their profits so that if they have a problem and something needs to be cleaned up, they pay for it and not taxpayers.
I believe we should have very strict cleanup laws and follow-up testing to determine what the level of radiation is in the environment. And it needs to be done on a frequent basis to make sure it's safe for animals, people, water tables, you name it.
Oh yeah, totally.
Yes, for sure.
Say that it should just be yes, no. Is nuclear radiation present? I don't think that should be the answer. I just think it should be, what are the levels of radiation?
Yes, I do.
Well, like for things like a car that's been in an accident, there's a report that you could get that says, there might be a problem, and I think we could do that for properties we're selling too.
I mean, it should be publicly available, right? Public knowledge, and there should be a disclosure up front, letting people know what's going on.
Anything that has to do with another human being or any living thing's health, there should be total transparency about that so that people can make a conscious choice. You think about that. Your desire to live in a place would be greater based upon how it aesthetically looks or feels than what the possible health effects might be. Like, you could go there, look at my high ceilings and look at the wonderful views, and you could die.
Absolutely, it should be an incredibly transparent environment. If not, then I believe the liability the government would have on it would be significant if they cleared a location as a clean site, and in fact it was not.
Is this road not a through road?
No, this is DOE property.
Oh, okay. Because it's on the map and it doesn't say that you can't drive through here because it's when you Google Map to get to it, it just shows to go down this road.
That's the old Rocky Flats site. But it's closed.
Okay, thanks.
Definitely testing, as well as I think making people aware and not ignoring the fact and thinking that we're dumb, actually.
Yeah. I think everything possible to make sure that places are maintained, that if there's a leak or a spill, they clean it up.
I think the government should at least educate the public about the disastrous, what happens with nuclear and radiation waste and all other stuff, because it's horrible.
So, we're back, and a lot of our research, along with our actual physical trip and visit to Rocky Flats, and use of a Geiger counter, has brought us to ask many questions about this. So, we brought in two lovely ladies today. So, we have Kristen Iversen, who is the author of the book Full Body Burn, Growing Up in the Nuclear Shadow of Rocky Flats. She is here on Google Hangouts today, and currently her book has gained approval to be made into a documentary that will be released next year. Go check the book out. It contains a lot of knowledge about Rocky Flats, and it's also a really good read. So, Kristen Iversen has come here to talk about her personal side of Rocky Flats, because she grew up in Colorado, near Rocky Flats, and she eventually grew to work in that facility. Thanks for coming to us, Kristen. Also, we have Tiffany Hansen here, who is the leader and co-founder of the Rocky Flats Downwinders, which is an organization that's focused on educating people about the health effects of living near Rocky Flats. Thank you so much for your activism.
Thanks for having me.
So, Kristen, you referred to Rocky Flats as the biggest secret in your own backyard. So, why is Rocky Flats the secret in your own backyard?
Well, when I was a kid, I had two sisters and a brother, and we had horses and dogs, and we were outside all the time, and it really was just kind of an idyllic childhood in many ways. In fact, my parents thought they were raising their kids in the perfect environment, but it was not perfect by any means. We were just 2 miles down the road from Rocky Flats. When I was a kid and a teenager, the plant was operated by Dow Chemical. And the rumor in our neighborhood was that they were making household cleaning supplies. And we did not know what really was going on because people could not talk about what happened at Rocky Flats. It was all secret. If you were a worker, if you talked about it, you could get fired. So when I was a kid, my mother thought they were making scrubbing bubbles. That's what we had been led to believe. We had been lied to repeatedly. And yet they were not making scrubbing levels. In fact, Rocky Flats, for almost 40 years, produced more than 70,000 plutonium pits or triggers for nuclear weapons. Each particular pit, the size of roughly a half grapefruit, slightly flattened half grapefruit, contains enough breathable particles of plutonium to kill every person on Earth. And there were lots of leaks, contamination, not just of plutonium, which was the worst thing, but many other things as well, including tritium, americium, lots and lots of carbon tetrachloride. You couldn't see it, taste it, feel it. It was completely invisible, and we had no idea that we were being exposed to it.
So there's quite a lot of dangerous stuff there. Did you know of any of the health effects related to Rocky Flats before you worked there?
Well, of course, we didn't know anything. There was nothing definitive. There was some information, even when I worked at the plant, about what was happening with workers, all the workers who became ill, and many workers died. But there has never been public health monitoring or a really thorough study of residents, the effects on residents around the plant. When I was a kid, there was cancer in almost every house in my neighborhood. My sisters and I, we grew up believing that cancer was just something that every family had to deal with. And these were young people getting cancer too. My first boyfriend in elementary school had cancer. And it was just everywhere. And we've seen that continue to the present day. And ongoing health issues in people and also in animals, in horses. There's strontium found in the bones of horses in our neighborhood, dogs, lots of cancer in dogs and that sort of thing. Some of those things we see continuing to the present day.
Mm-hmm. So, going on for that, what did you do at the Rocky Flats plant?
Well, when I went to work at Rocky Flats, I was a graduate student at the University of Denver. I was getting my PhD in English. Mm-hmm. I had very strong writing skills, and I was essentially a technical writer, a senior level administrative assistant. My duties had to do with writing and preparing reports, and what I would do was interview managers and project managers around the plant, including the DOE manager, Mark Silverman, and I would meet with managers and type up reports, write up reports that were then sent on to Washington, D.C., to the Department of Energy there, and then also to Albuquerque in the Los Alamos DOE headquarters there. So it was a crash course, so to speak, in learning about all the problems at the plant, all the leaks and the contamination problems, and of course a lot of that stuff leaked off-site as well.
Mm-hmm. So how is Rocky Flats viewed by the people who work there and the community in general?
Well, I think this is one of the most interesting and probably tragic aspects of the story. Rocky Flats is something that has divided our community for decades and continues to divide our community, and the kind of opinions and political fighting that we see going on around it prevents us from really dealing with the situation historically or environmentally. I saw it in the workers when I worked at the plant. There were some workers who felt very strongly that Rocky Flats was saving the country. We were building nuclear weapons, and that was necessary. And whatever they had to give up in terms of privacy or secrecy or even their own personal health or the health of their families, they were willing to do that. There were workers who felt betrayed. They had been lied to. They did not know that they were being contaminated, what they were being exposed to and when. And so there was dissent among the workers, certainly. And great dissent in our community. People started protesting at the plant in the 1970s. And at least in my neighborhood, which was very near the plant, people made fun of the protesters. They thought it was that they were unpatriotic, that the best thing was just to, whatever was going on out there, don't ask questions. And then it turns out, of course, that the activists were correct about many, many things. And Rocky Flats is something that continues to divide us to the present day. We have a government and other organizations, companies that are not telling us the full truth. I think there's a real effort to erase the history of Rocky Flats, which is important historically and environmentally and in terms of public health. Housing developers and other developers out there are anxious to erase this history, just cover it up. Plutonium, you can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it. It's hard to prove the direct link to cancer, although I do believe we will prove it. It's kind of like smoking, 30 years ago when there was a lot of denial on the part of the tobacco companies. I think we will be able to prove a link with cancer and some of the blood disorders and other things that we're seeing, epilepsy, for example. I think that there's going to be a lot of change with Rocky Flats, and we must pay attention, and we cannot ignore it and sweep it under the rug.
Yes. So there was the general community, then there were the people kind of in authority and power who knew about a lot of this. So how did the authority and government talk about Rocky Flats when it was still in operation?
Well, you can see this, you can follow this. It's very interesting in the articles and even in the advertisements in the Denver Post and the Rocky Mountain News over the years. Rockwell and Dow Chemical continuously lied to the public about what was going on. They said there was nothing dangerous going on, that people didn't have anything to worry about. And then on the other side, we had Dr. Carl Johnson, the health director of Jefferson County, who was the first one to initiate studies in the soil and also look at some of the illnesses that were happening. And they found plutonium in the soil. He was the first one to say, hey, this is not safe. I'm not going to approve any housing development within 10 miles of Rocky Flats. We have no evacuation in place in case something happens. And by that, I mean Rocky Flats was top of the list in terms of being on hit list during the Cold War. And we were right at the center of it. No one told us. There's so many things that we had no way to know what was really happening. I'll just say quickly, there was one local farmer in our neighborhood who had a little pig named Scooter who was born without back legs, and many of his animals were deformed, and he was one of the first ones, along with other people like living with horses out there. They would go to meetings and say, look what's happening to our animals, look what's happening to people in these neighborhoods, tell us the truth. And we were not told the truth.
Mm-hmm. So it's obvious you weren't being told the truth. So how did Rocky Flats actually affect the community that lived there health-wise? What was going on over there?
Well, in terms of the workers at the plant, one of the first things they discovered was borreliosis, which is a disease of the lungs, often fatal, that is tied directly to beryllium, something that was used at the plant. That was the first one that was really easy to define. But of course, since then, I think we've identified, Tiffany could probably say this more specifically than I can, but I think it's more than 40 specific cancers and illnesses related to workers at the plant, directly related to exposure. Now, it's harder to stay with residents because, again, we have not had any real study. But I can say, based on what we've seen so far in the ongoing health study and things that we've seen in the past, we've seen a lot of cancer, thyroid cancer in particular. A friend of mine, a neighbor, and I write about this family in the book. This particular person, this young woman, had 9 brain tumors. Their home was directly downwind from Rocky Flats. Their house was right on Stanley Lake, which is a lake contaminated with plutonium in the sediment. Although you would not know that because they are not eager to put it on signs out there, but it is indeed in the sediment. And so, we see a lot of cancers and blood disorders, childhood illnesses, and cancers that continue to the present day, and certainly thyroid and lymphoma and leukemia, which is what is my family has dealt with to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. So after all this, you decided to write your book. So how did the community's view affect the content of your book?
Well, I'll say briefly, I decided to write the book the day that I quit my job at Rocky Flats. And the day I quit, I had finally learned what really was going on at the plant. And I come home from work one day after I picked up my kids from school and turned on the television, and there was a Nightline expose on Rocky Flats, and they were interviewing a lot of the people that I worked with, including Mark Silver, Department of Energy manager at the time. And to his credit, he was one of the first ones to say, this site is deeply contaminated. We can't control it. We have too much plutonium on site. We don't know what to do. And there's a lot of contamination on site and off site, and we're seeing this in health effects. And I was so stunned at that moment. I thought, how can I grow up next to this facility and indeed work out here and not know the truth of what was happening? People in my neighborhood did not know the truth, and people I worked with did not know the truth. So that was the moment that I remember that moment sitting in my living room and my heart just sank, because I knew my health was in danger, and my family's, and my 2 little boys. And so I knew that was the day that I knew I would quit, and the day I quit was the day I knew I would write a book. 10 years of research and writing went into that book, and I had several research assistants helping me as well. We double, triple checked everything in that book. It had to be accurate in terms of facts and statistics and information. And people, when I was writing the book, it was the same thing as when I was a kid. Rocky Flats was the forbidden topic. You could not talk about it. People who worked at the plant for 30 years, they would come home, to homes in my neighborhood and sit down with the kids at the dinner table and not be able to say what they did at work all day. It was so secretive. And so when I was writing the book, people in Colorado would say to me, no one will ever publish this book. It's a story that is supposed to be secret. The government wants it secret. No one will publish it. Of course, that turned out not to be the case. The book was published. It's been published in many countries. And one of the most ironic things to me is discovering that people in other states, and indeed people in other countries, know more about Rocky Flats than people living in Colorado.
Mm-hmm. So, from that book, what are some of the, most standout stories of people affected by Rocky Flats?
Oh, there's so many stories. There are so many stories. There were some very brave workers. Jackie Brever, for example, who was one of the first women to go to work at the plant, and it was very common in the early years, and even when I was working out there, for Rocky Flats to hire people who are fresh out of high school, who had not been to college or anything like that, and they would bring them in as cafeteria workers, sometimes as janitors and that sort of thing. And then they would learn that with some additional training, they could actually go to work in the hot areas of the plant, where they could make quite a bit more money, and it was a much riskier job also. So Jackie Brever was one of the first women to actually work in the plutonium foundry right on the assembly line there, right on the production line. And when we had the FBI and EPA raid in 1989, part of the reason why that raid was so successful was because of Jackie Brever and other people like her. She was the first worker to agree to talk to the FBI. Some of the workers retaliated against her. In fact, one of her gloves, workers had to wear lead-lined gloves to protect them from the plutonium when they worked on the hot line, and one of her gloves was sliced and she was contaminated with plutonium in retaliation for talking to the FBI. And she later died of thyroid cancer related to that contamination. But her story paved the way for the FBI to begin a very serious and thorough investigation that led to the raid, and that eventually led to the closing of the facility and to the cleanup. But when I say cleanup, I put quotes around cleanup. It's not a cleanup. It's a very controversial and compromised cleanup. So I just want to emphasize that. But Jackie's story, I think, is particularly moving. I mentioned the young woman, the girl who grew up next to our house. Her name is Tamara. Her story is quite compelling. She's had so many surgeries for brain tumors, and doctors did not believe that she would survive the first one. I believe she's now had 9. And she has had so much of her brain removed that she has difficulty doing things like setting the table for dinner and that sort of thing, because her brain can't process that information properly, but her language skills, her linguistic skills are are intact, and she is still with us, and she's very articulate, and she's one of the most remarkable people I've ever met in my life. I've met so many remarkable people, and there are so many incredible stories about Rocky Flats, about people who were brave enough to stand up, to protest out at the plant, all the nuns who stood out there for decades, and many of them still go out there every Sunday. And they stand up there with signs along with people like the Rocky Flats Downwinders and say, tell us the truth. You know, it's one thing. I just want to say, I think the most important thing is that we must have truth and transparency. If anyone chooses to buy a house next to that site, near that site, and raise their children there, if anybody chooses to go onto that site, to go hiking or biking, or they're going to let their third grader go out there on a field trip, that's their choice, but it should be a fully informed choice. They should know what happened at that plant. They should know what remains at that plant. They should know that 1,300 acres are profoundly contaminated and the rest of the site is controversial, and that we cannot take assurances by developers or certain government officials that the site is absolutely safe, because it is not. And there is nothing out there right now in terms of signage or any kind of information for people to really learn what they're getting into when they go out there.
Mm-hmm. So Rocky Flats was a very big deal, and lots has happened there. So why is the story of Rocky Flats so important today? Why does it matter still?
I think it's a very important story, and we must not forget it. And there are a number of reasons why. The first reason is just it's a very important historical story. Rocky Flats was one of 13 facilities around the country that produced nuclear weapons during the Cold War. We were the only ones who produced plutonium triggers. We were the heart of the operation. The plutonium came from Hanford. The bombs themselves were assembled at Pantex in Texas. But the entire system was dependent upon us. And what happened there historically is very, very important. I don't think people in Colorado realize how important that story is. It's a very important story environmentally. Even when we had environmental regulation, RCRA and the Clean Water Act and all of that in the 1970s, Rocky Flats was allowed to operate for decades without any environmental regulation. They weren't required to follow those regulations. There were things going on out there that people need to know about. They had an incinerator and possibly even 2 incinerators that were burning plutonium-contaminated waste that went into the atmosphere. There were more than 40 fires out at Rocky Flats that contaminated local areas and indeed the Metro Denver area, 2 big fires in particular. There is an environmental legacy in the land. Plutonium has a half-life of 24,100 years. It's going to be dangerous for a very long time. It tends to cluster. So just because if you test one particular spot, that does not mean that the spot right next to it is safe. And people need to, we need to look at how we have poisoned and scarred the land and the kind of legacy that we have to deal with and that we left to our children, and our grandchildren. And then it's an important story politically as well. And as long as we continue to deny what happened and fight politically on what happened, we cannot help the people who are still getting sick, the people who have died, the people who are sick, and the ongoing illnesses that we're seeing in young people and children out in the site.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so right now there's a huge amount of controversy whether or not the site and the area around it is safe, and a lot of stuff has happened. So we're going to move on kind of to the activist perspective. So we have Tiffany Hansen, who, once again, she's the leader and co-founder of the Rocky Flats Downwinders, and they have an important story to tell. So what is the mission of the Rocky Flats Downwinders?
So the mission of the Rocky Flats Downwinders is to raise awareness in the community about Rocky Flats and also to sensitize the medical community about Rocky Flats and potential health impacts of living near the former nuclear weapons plant. We also want to provide supportive services for people that have been impacted, sick people in the community, provide support groups, and if we show that there is in fact a connection between health impacts and living near Rocky Flats, we want to fight for coverage under the Radiation Exposure and Compensation Act.
Mm-hmm. So what's this motivation to do this?
So in 2014, I was having some health problems, and I was Googling some of my symptoms and problems and trying to find out some causes. And in my Google search, I found, well, first what popped up was nuclear waste, and that was interesting to me. So I put nuclear waste in Arvada in my Google search, and up popped Rocky Flats. And I moved out of Arvada in 1992 when I was 18 years old, and I didn't really stay in connection with anyone in the community. So although I lived, a little over 3.5 miles from the plant growing up, like Kristen, it wasn't discussed in our home, and it wasn't discussed amongst neighbors. I could see the plant, the lights of the plant out of my window in my bedroom. So I knew something was out there, but I didn't know what was going on. So I found out about Rocky Flats, and right away I found Kristen's book. So it worked out really well that her book had been, released just a couple years before I found out about Rocky Flats. But that was one of the great places that I was able to find, sources of information in one place that that told the story about Rocky Flats, and that a lot of people had suffered over the course of years, and that my health problems and other people that I was reaching on Facebook that were experiencing problems, it wasn't really unique. It seemed to be more common. And so we organized Rocky Flats Downwinders as a way to create more awareness around this issue and to try to connect with people in the community, because a lot of people were sick and didn't have support groups and kind of wondering why nothing is being done around this issue in terms of preventing more people from getting sick. When we saw the construction going on and further development in the area, we were concerned and alarmed.
Mm-hmm. So Rocky Flats itself is a very big thing. So what is a common motivator of everyone in your organization?
So one thing that we're really interested in, and the thing that seems to be missing from a lot of the information that we found, is looking at the health implications of living near the nuclear weapons plant, living near Rocky Flats. Not a lot of health studies have been done using the community. Dr. Carl Johnson, like Kristen mentioned, did some studies about cancer in the area, but we were not really satisfied with what has been researched, and that there hasn't been any health studies looking at autoimmune diseases and cardiac problems and pulmonary diseases and reproductive problems and things like this. So there was like a missing piece of research. So the thing that kind of motivated us is we want to see more research done around health and how health is impacted how our health is impacted by living near a nuclear weapons plant.
Mm-hmm. So there's quite a lot of health stuff going on here. So what exactly has your organization done to bring about this awareness and create change over Rocky Flats?
So we're just getting started. We organized in 2014, and officially we became a nonprofit this year. So we have just worked through people's word of mouth and a lot of volunteers getting together, trying to spread the word about Rocky Flats. And most importantly, we made a great connection with Metropolitan State University and a professor there, Carol Jensen, who was open and listened to our concerns, and actually then started the first health survey of residents that is now open and still available on our website. So we're still taking information of people who live near the plant and all the health effects that they have had, and family members, so they're able to, so we can document in a real way what's happening in the community.
Yes. So how have you or someone else been affected by Rocky Flats and other nuclear issues personally, on a personal level?
Well, for me initially, I was having a lot of health problems, and I was trying to find answers. Luckily for me, in 2014, I found out I had an ovarian tumor. It was discovered that I did not have cancer. So that was a big motivator for me to say, okay, I don't have cancer. How can I try to move forward this body of knowledge and get more interest and studies around the health of Rocky Flats Downwinders? So I personally was impacted, but I've really felt personally impacted by the stories that I've heard from people that have contacted me. And Kristen, had the same thing with her book. I reached out to Kristen. I was able to find a contact number for her after I read her book, and I reached out and I was like, did this really happen? Like, I live in this area too, and I was in total shock that I lived so close to a nuclear weapons plant, and her book was just mind-blowing. So I was amazed to be able to reach out and have that resource. So I've been affected by hearing the stories. I'm constantly, we're contacted by people all the time who have been personally impacted, who are suffering from rare cancers, have lost loved ones, and so I feel personally impacted through their stories. As they reach out and they need a voice and they're wondering why nothing's been done, that is a huge driving force for me.
And that's a big thing. You've done quite a lot of good activism. So right now, we'd like to turn to group discussion, since there are several different perspectives on this issue. And we'd also like to talk about the ways people are affected and what, as in the general community, can do about it. So why shouldn't people be allowed to visit Rocky Flats? Kristen, you want to go first?
I'd be happy to go first. I think that it's no question that that this site continues to be dangerous and unpredictable. There's a lot of, you all know, being in Colorado, there's a lot of wind and rain and snow, and it's an environment that's constantly changing. We know that there is plutonium in the ground. We know that 1,300 acres is really profoundly contaminated. And we've got groundhogs out there busy digging up the soil and bringing everything up to the surface. We've got deer out there, birds and wind, and the deer don't know that if they eat grass on site and get plutonium in their bodies, and plutonium has been found in the deer out there, that they shouldn't cross the street. You know, it cannot be contained. There's no way to guarantee that it is safe. And the best that we can do is close it, acknowledge what happened, and for anyone who chooses to live near that site. And I have to say that it breaks my heart. I grew up on that land. I love that land. I love that view. It's just such a remarkably beautiful and important place. And we poisoned it. And we poisoned it permanently. And it's very foolish of us, you know, to ignore that. So I think it should be permanently closed. And I think that people who choose to live near the site or work near the site must be aware. There need to be signs. There's got to be information that tells people what really happened. And there is a museum in the works. The museum itself is controversial. I'll just say very, very briefly. Some people believe that this museum should only tell the so-called good side of Rocky Flats, if you could even call it that. And by that, they mean the fact that we produce more than 70,000 plutonium triggers for nuclear weapons. And that is an accomplishment. That's something, you know, to be proud of. And that's the only side of the story they want to tell in the museum. And yet the museum needs to tell the full story of the contamination, of the people who grew sick and died, not just the workers, but the residents, the animal contamination, the full story. We need to make people aware of that.
You have anything to add, Tiffany?
I just would add, you know, why are we encouraging people to go to Rocky Flats in the first place? This is Colorado. We have, you know, the mountains are right there. There's plenty of space that is available for recreation and trails, and so why are we opening, you know, a place that's got a super fun site that's active at the center to encourage people to recreate? It's almost like, are we trying to normalize this and make it seem like this is fine? This was a nuclear weapons production site. They made 70,000 plutonium triggers over the course of 40 years. I mean, just the facts alone make me wonder, why would we open this anyways? There's no need. We have plenty of other options.
That's true. So do you think that safety and environmental precautions need to be taken around Rocky Flats? Kristen?
Shall I go first on that? Absolutely. You know, the first thing is awareness, and just knowing, you know, the kind of risk that you're taking if you go on the site or if you're near the site. In terms of what precautions can be taken, that should be debated publicly and openly. What does that mean? And there's not going to be any off-site cleanup. There's no doubt that there was contamination off-site. There's quite a dramatic map that's available that shows the plume of the two very large plutonium fires. And that plume, those two fires carry plutonium contamination and other contaminants as well over Arvada, Westminster, Broomfield, and all over the metro area, Arvada and Westminster in particular. And this is based on Department of Energy information and studies, and you can look to see what neighborhoods, were contaminated with that. What can we do now? There is no possibility of off-site cleanup. And the on-site cleanup is compromised, as I mentioned earlier. So the only real tool that we have is knowledge, just letting people know. And if they're living in the area already, or if they're planning to live in that area, to know what to look out for. These are the signs for the illnesses or the cancers, whatever, that we tend to be related to plutonium and other contaminants. And then seek treatment as quickly as possible. So knowledge is power. Knowledge is key here. There's no question.
What do you have to say about that, Tiffany?
I would just like to add that, I'm concerned for the workers out there that are doing construction at the closest community, which is Candela's, workers that will be sent to the Fish and Wildlife site to open the wildlife refuge, and then just communities that are downwind, even Denver, because if you're digging up in areas, like Kristen said, that are known contaminated areas, and we have Chinook winds coming off of, the Flatirons that are 90 miles an hour at times, sometimes over 120 miles an hour, historically. How is, construction and trail making, how's that going to stay on site? That's going to get kicked up, and workers and people in surrounding communities are all going to be impacted. It's not just people that choose to recreate out there, people that choose to live out there. In fact, I think we should all be concerned, because it's a bigger public health hazard as the construction continues in the area.
So how did the laws and government initially contribute to the problem at Rocky Flats?
In terms of government, should I go ahead, Tiffany?
Yeah, please. Kristen, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's a little bit of delay. Well, certainly the atomic energy, going all the way to when the bomb was developed, it created a public in the plan that was not required to know what was happening. And we saw that secrecy continue long after environmental took place, and it's supposed to be more open. So we see profit mode into the present day.
So, Tiffany, what do you say about the laws and regulations?
Kristen touched a little bit on it earlier, just that there was no environmental laws in place. And, the plant started production in 1952. So there was nothing kind of controlling and monitoring the laws around producing nuclear weapons and waste that was associated with that, at that time. So the lack of, oversight initially contributed to it, contributed to problems.
So, back to today. What can the general community do about Rocky Flats today?
Well, I'll start off in that I think it's very important to pay attention to ask questions. Don't take value what the government tells us, or what any of the corporations, or even what any of the housing developers tell us out there. There's kind of a constant mantra by the Department of Energy in particular, and now also local developers, this constant mantra that they're putting out, that it's safe, don't worry about it, there's nothing for you to worry about. When I was a kid, my parents would say, surely the government will tell us if something's wrong. Well, they didn't. And they're still acknowledging that risk. So I think it's up to each one of us individually to ask a lot of questions, to find out as much information as we can. You can look at the court documentation, the class action lawsuit, could be Rockwell in particular. There's a tremendous amount of information, and it's available on the web and in other places that shows very specifically what happened out there and the problems and contamination. You're not going to get that kind of information from the Colorado, CDPHE, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, or from the DOE. You got to dig for it, but it's there. It's up to each one of us to look at what's happened and make sure that this story stays transparent and we educate as many people as possible.
Mm-hmm. So going back to the kind of governmental thing, are there any laws and new bills we should be aware of right now going around Congress that have potential to impact this issue?
Well, I would say, and Tiffany will probably want to add to this, I think Rocky Flats Downwinders is extremely important with respect to this, and the ongoing workers' issues are very, very important. The worker legislation related to workers' illnesses is important because, again, it proves a link and brings many of these things to light. What happens next? It's up to how people in the local communities, I think, react to what's happening. We tried Wes McKinley, who was foreman of the grand jury, and eventually became a representative for Colorado, worked tirelessly, sign it, that it signs up that say, look, this is what happened with the plant, this is why it can be potentially dangerous for you to know. That was in Colorado. Again and again, it was opposed by local development companies that are building health. They don't want something like that out next to houses. We need to reignite legislation, get that moving signs up there, and try to prove it's like the Parkway, redirected by all of the development that is going on out there. It's a very aggressive on the part of to develop that because it's such a beautiful location. It's right between Denver and Boulder, area with a lot of growth and a lot of money. And I think right now, frankly, a lot of people have eyes in their eyes and they're willing to risk the public health for those dollar signs.
Mm-hmm. So, Tiffany Hansen, since you're part of the Rocky Flats Downwinders, what do you have to talk about flaws and bills?
Well, I can say that recently we've heard from the head of the Jefferson County Department of Public Health, Dr. Mark Johnson, and we heard from him, and he mentioned twice in emails to us his interest in having Congress commission an independent review of the data and research that's been done on Rocky Flats. So we are trying to reach out to our local Congress people and our state senators and let them know that if the head of the health department wants this to be done and also has interest in having the grand jury documents unsealed, we want to have that done. We think citizens want to have that done. So we're reaching out now and saying, how can we help support this, this cause, and what do we need to do? So we're encouraging people in the community to reach out to their local Congress people, their state senators, and let them know that they also feel like Congress should do an independent review of the data. And take it a step further, we're interested in trying to get an independent randomized controlled study of residents who live near Rocky Flats. And so we're interested to find out what that would look like financially, what that would take in terms of resources, because we have heard from Colorado Department of Public Health that would be really expensive. Not impossible, but expensive. We're interested to know how much that would cost and what we need to do to try to get something like that done so we can get an independent, randomized controlled study of the health of downwinders.
Yes, it sounds like a very important step. So going back to the target audience of our program, which is the youth, how can youth today empower themselves to help change issues like this?
Go ahead, Tim.
You can go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to, there's a little bit of an echo here, so it's a little bit hard for me to hear. I was just going to say that I have been very moved by all the people who are now protesting out at the plant, people who showed up who do come to the rallies at the Capitol about Rocky Flats, and a lot of those people are young people, and they're engaged in the issue. And I think that one of the errors that has been made in the past is sometimes people look at the story and say, "Oh, that's an old story that happened a long time ago. It doesn't really affect us." And all those activists and hippies, my father used to say, all those hippies out there protesting, that it's something that happened in the past, and it's absolutely not true. It's a current and ongoing issue, and I think for young people to educate themselves and get involved, this is just so important, and a big part of what they can do is just talk about it and attend some of these rallies and some of the protests out at the site that continue, thanks to people like Tiffany.
So Tiffany, you're the activist here.
I would encourage people, young people who know about Rocky Flats, to start talking about it, with their peers, and make it a conversation for discussion, because the bottom line is this is a problem that's going to be left for you all to deal with, and for your children and for future generations. So you all can't really be proactive and do anything if you don't know about this and you don't have the information. So you're already at a disadvantage. In the case of Rocky Flats, there's no signage telling you. So maybe your parents aren't telling you because maybe they don't know. Maybe, you're new to the area and you don't know. So we have to, support each other and communicate, this, because it's a really important issue for our community today and our kids, future generations. Being exposed to plutonium and these chemicals don't just impact the individual. This can cause genetic mutations and long-term problems. So I really encourage people to find out more about Rocky Flats. Reading Kristen's book is a great way. It's so, thoroughly researched and really well. You can just find all the sources of information that she got, so you know that it's a really thorough place to start your research, and then just start talking to people about it. People live, in the area and don't know, so I think the responsibility is on us as a community to start talking about this issue. We weren't talking about it when we were growing up. It's time that we start talking about it.
It's true. It's a very important issue. So, on a final question, what would you recommend that we do to protect the people that live in areas near nuclear sites?
We're actually working right now, and in 2018, the Rocky Flats Downwinders are developing a program called Healthy Choices, Healthy Families. And it's to teach people who live near these kinds of sites some tips and ways to keep themselves safer, in terms of there's certain air filters that can help in terms of the air. There's certain water filters that you can use. Maybe gardening isn't the best thing for you to do if you're living to the site, close to the site. Maybe you stay in on windy days and choose not to recreate outside. And there's things that you can do to protect yourself, and we're going to explore that more as we in this next year, when we work with people with the scientific background to make sure the information is accurate and can try to help protect people.
Yeah. Kristen, what do you have to say about the justice?
Yeah, I agree with all of that, and I think it's a local issue, and it's also a global issue. And I would just add briefly that there's also a moral issue here. I think it's easy for us here in Colorado. It's easy for us to forget what we did at Rocky Flats. We built nuclear weapons. We built 70,000 nuclear weapons. And one thing that happened after my book was published was that I had the opportunity to begin to work with people on a national and international level. People from Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, who had experienced the nuclear bomb, the Hibakusha, and some of the organizations in Washington, D.C. And that work, it turns out, has been very important to me. And I was able to work with ICANN, the International Campaign Against Nuclear Weapons, they just won the Nobel Prize. And it was such a tremendous moment, and I think there's great hope in that moment. And so I think we have to advocate on the personal level, environmentally, and in terms of public health, and looking at the historical story of Rocky Flats. And we also remember that we were the heart, the beginning the most important part of the development of nuclear weapons in the world. This is an internet story. It's very important. And with the nuclear weapons, it begins, happens to me at Rocky Flats.
So, is there anything else you would like to say about this topic? Anything you want to say about yourselves or any other steps we can take?
I would just say keep talking about this, and I'm just honored to be here because I really do feel young people are the ones that need to know this information and really deserve to have a clear, accurate view of the history that happened so close in our backyards.
Mm-hmm. Kristen, what do you have to say about that?
I would look quick what's happened. There's a new documentary coming out, titled Documentary School Body Burden, that will be out next year. And then they'll have a book coming out in the next year of essays and articles about Rocky Flats, or articles, kinds of people, physicists, attorneys involved with Rocky Flats, 12 articles by Rocky Flats, titled Dealing with It. And the mentioned brief title comes from a contest that the Denver had when they changed the name of Rocky Flats Nuclear Weapons Plant to the Rocky Flats Environmental Technology Center, which was really, they had a contest with local residents to recommend other titles for the site, and someone came up with Doom the View, and so we thought that was also horrifying. So there's that time. That book will be gone very soon.
Thank you two so much for being here. This has been a great discussion. That's all the times we have today. So we'd really like to thank our guests, Kristen and Tiffany, for taking the time to be here for us today. As I said before, I think this has been a great discussion. It's certainly taught me a lot about Rocky Flats and this issue. We hope that more people, especially young people, are more aware of Rocky Flats and other environmentally contaminated sites and social issues that will potentially affect their future. For more information on Open Media Generation and how to join, go to openmediageneration.org. Thank you so much for watching.